Hey, welcome Jeffrey Rath to the Biodigital Convergence Transhumanist Report. And as I call it on YouTube, sheepdogging with Tom Deans. So welcome to the show, man. It's an honor and it's great to have you here to weigh in on some very important issues going on with the independence movement in Alberta. So first and foremost, I'm going to read your bio, okay? So Jeffrey Rath holds an honors degree in political science with distinction and an honors degree in law from the London School of Economics and Political Science. He has practiced law in Alberta for 35 years. His career is marked by numerous landmark decisions in courts, including at the Supreme Court of Canada. Mr. Rath took the Kenney government to court over the illegal COVID orders issued by Jason Kenney during that dark period of Alberta history. Mr. Rath is the only lawyer in Canada to succeed in obtaining a court order overturning every COVID order issued in Alberta. As a result of this ruling, every COVID charge for violation of the illegal orders had to be withdrawn or expunged, with all fines paid under these illegal orders repaid. Mr. Rath is currently the general counsel to the Alberta Prosperity Society and Free Alberta. Stay Free Alberta. He remains one of the leading voices and directing minds of the Alberta independence movement. Mr. Rath has been a driving force in freeing Albertans from the tyranny of communist Canada. So once again, man, I thank you for what you do. I really appreciate people like yourself that put your real face out there. I say you've got your skin in the fight. And I appreciate everything that you've done, using your skill set, your knowledge in the courts to protect freedom in Canada. So again, welcome to the show. And there's been some breaking news happening here. Let's just talk about that right now with all these City of Edmonton cops that showed up to one of our events. So let's just dive in right there. What is going on?
Well, and again, it was a David Parker, Centurion Project event, and apparently I've seen photos of it online, but apparently, 8 to 10 police cars and over a dozen police officers showed up at this Centurion Project event at the urging of Elections Alberta. Apparently, they're making allegations that somehow or other David Parker and the Centurion Project have unlawfully accessed, a list of electors. Seems very unlikely to me, but that's the allegation. I want to state for the record that Stay Free Alberta, neither Stay Free Alberta or the Alberta Prosperity Society have accessed any voter lists. We've created our own lists through our membership and people volunteering their information to us in support of Alberta independence. So, I'm not sure, what's going on there. But again, if an investigation's ongoing with regard to, to voters lists, really, 12 police cars at a political event. I mean, it really seems like, this is, that this is political intimidation on a large scale, by Elections Alberta. It certainly doesn't demonstrate any level of normal, what I would consider to be normal conduct. I mean, if they want to serve a letter, on Mr. Parker advising him that, that he's under investigation again, I mean, they can send it to Mr. Parker personally. I mean, I understand they have a lien on his house, so they certainly know where he lives, right? Mm-hmm. So, so I'm not sure what Elections Alberta is doing, but again, it's just this ongoing effort, to distract, diminish, intimidate, et cetera, anybody on our side of the argument. I mean, let's face it. I mean, and Elections Alberta is not the least bit unbiased in these matters. They keep, we're unbiased, and then they instruct their lawyer to come into court and make whatever arguments he can to, undermine anything and everything we're doing while trying to, while saying they're unbiased and they're not taking a position. I mean, I had to deal with that yesterday, for goodness sake. I was in court yesterday morning, dealing with, some matters on the, on the case that was brought, by the First Nation. And in typical fashion, Elections Alberta's lawyer puts, we're not taking a position, but, It's pretty clear that whose side they're on. I mean, it was the same thing in front of Justice Feasby. They went out and hired, two lawyers paid for by the Alberta taxpayers to take a completely oppositional position to the position of Alberta independence, paid for by the Alberta taxpayers through
Yeah.
the Elections Alberta. So none of this is fair. I mean, the entire game is
No.
rigged from start to finish, and Elections Alberta are the ones that are rigging it. So I mean, that's my personal view in any event.
Yeah, and you can have that. I mean,
Yeah.
you're allowed to have your personal opinion and your views on the matter, right? I mean, it's been a tough battle, but I mean, I'm glad too myself just being out there myself. I mean, you see it all, right? I mean, you see a tremendous amount of support as what I experienced as a canvasser, and also you get the people that are very hostile too, right? So it is a battle of the minds, right? But I find that when you actually take a look at what you guys have done, I'm very impressed because you guys have forged like a legal pathway ahead, and you're using the system to forge ahead in a way to me that completely makes sense, like financially speaking too. Like let alone like breaking free of, I'm going to say, communist Canada, this strange neo-communist system, like with I mean, I'm going to say a touch of woke on top of it all, right? I mean, it's like our governments no longer have any ability to determine between what's true, what's factual, and what's really good for the betterment of our provinces, right? So
I
I'm done. Yeah, I'm done.
I actually was explaining this to my child a while ago, and I said, your mom and I almost feel like we need to apologize to you because when you were born, the world
Yeah,
wasn't like this, right?
yeah, for
We
sure.
had Canadian governments that, by and large, all agreed on, there was a consensus, whether it be it a liberal government or a conservative government, that
Yeah,
debts and deficits had to be kept low so that we wouldn't get to a point where, as we were under Trudeau the first, right? Where
yeah.
50% of all tax revenues collected went to service the national debt. Well, Trudeau the second and Mark Carney have put us back in that exact same odious position through all their flagrant wasteful spending,
Hmm.
on things they should have never spent money on. So Canada's now in a position where Canada's basically bankrupt, where 50% of all tax dollars collected go to service the national debt. And of course, what I was telling my kid is, I said, Canada didn't used to run this way. I mean, there's this broad general consensus about keeping debts and deficits low so that we could keep taxes relatively low, so that people
Yeah,
felt like they were getting ahead, that people were
yeah.
incentivized to go and work, et cetera. And then on top of it, there was a general consensus that governments were not going to micromanage people and that government would stay out of of people's personal business, right?
Yeah.
And under Trudeau, I mean, all of that and COVID, all of that went out the window. Like,
Hmm.
first of all,
Yeah.
like, nobody cares about keeping debts and deficits low. Inflation, has completely gotten away from, the central bank and the government of Canada. And I say intentionally because they've intentionally doubled the M2 money supply in Canada, like a lot of Western governments have, right, to pay for all of their COVID debt, which, I mean, we never should have spent that money, $2,000 CERB payments to kids living at home with mom and dad while they don't have
Hmm.
utilities bills, whatever. It was ludicrous. I mean,
Yeah.
billions and billions and billions of dollars added to the national debt, money completely wasted, on this test run, for universal basic income, bankrupting the country, stealing the savings and equity of hardworking Canadians across the country. Because if you think
Yeah.
about it, that's what doubling the money supply does, right? So you go to a grocery store, your
Yeah.
groceries aren't twice as expensive. Your money is worth half as much. Like,
Mhm.
what does it tell you in the last 2 years that the Mexican peso, for God's sake, has gone up 30% against the Canadian dollar, right?
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
we're soon going to have to change the name of our currency to the Canadian peso, right? Because it's become that bad, right? And if you think about what they do when they double the money supply, they're literally stealing half of your retirement savings. They're stealing half of the equity in your home. They're stealing half of the value of your stock portfolio. They're stealing half of the value of the money in your bank account while making your life twice as expensive, right? This is
Yep.
what the Trudeau and the Liberals have done, And this is what Albertans want to get away from. I mean, we want not only do we want freedom from Canada and, and the tyranny being visited upon us, by communist Ottawa, but, Albertans want a new system of government,
Yeah.
right? Like, and you've got all these wannabe groups that are popping up now. Because, of course, now that, Mitch and Stay Free Alberta and, Alberta Prosperity Society and all of the groups that I was involved in founding, right, have done all of the hard work and the heavy lifting. We now have all little wannabe politicians popping up. And
I see that.
I'll say something a little controversial. I'll include Keith Wilson in that. I mean, running around wanting to set up his, independence transition committee so him and his little group of faceless billionaires, can take over the independence project, on a going forward basis, right? There's all of these wannabe groups running around trying to take charge and, we're going to be, we're going to manage the transition and we're going to be in charge, right? It's this whole Yertle the turtle syndrome that just drives me nuts that all these people want to be in charge. I mean, like, as far as I'm concerned, I don't ever feel like I'm in charge of anything, right? I'm just one of the many faces, and voices in the, in the movement. Obviously, I've been working very, very, very hard to get us to where we're at, and continue to, and we'll continue to, to work forward. But now we've got this weird situation, like there's this one group called Renew Canada, and and somebody was posting online. I mean, this group, we want Alberta to be independent, but we want to maintain the Westminster parliamentary system. Like, why the hell would anybody want to maintain the Westminster parliamentary system? It's the root of all evil, right, in this province. Like, it really
agree.
is. So I mean, so you've got all these weird groups of people wanting to do, to be in charge and put themselves forward as the, as the responsible parties. And I'm just shaking my head going, oh my God, like, it's just, let's just all work together and get this over the goal line and, and find a way to make this work without a whole bunch of people running around trying to be in charge of stuff. Right. Or, I'm to be the leader. We need to have a leader. We need to have a focused political campaign and, all this stuff. I mean, I think the grassroots have got us to where we are. And I think we need to keep driving that forward. And we just need to do a better, not a better job. So I think we're doing a great job, but we need to keep reinforcing our message. Right. Like, we know what independence means. It means cutting everybody's taxes in half. Right. So, if you're paying 40, you're paying, 20 or 30 or $40,000 a year in combined federal provincial income tax. Imagine your tax bill cut in half, right? That's what Alberta, right in year one independence, that's what Alberta independence is going to do for you, with a view then moving forward, to reducing, income taxes to zero, right? All of which is possible, right? We want a new constitution, right? We want to have checks and balances on our government. We're sick and tired of this Westminster system of governance where we effectively have an elected dictatorship for 4 or 5 years, every time a majority government gets elected, right? Nobody elected Danielle Smith Queen of Alberta, but she certainly operates that way. It doesn't matter it doesn't even matter what her membership wants, right? Like at least 65% of the UCP base, right, are in favor of independence. But Danielle, I'm, united,
that's
within a united Canada. I'm a federalist. I support, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, Danielle, you're completely out of touch with your members, right? So are you a Democratic leader of a Democratic Party or not? And how long can you continue to maintain moral authority as the leader of that party, which is the only reason that she's premier, is by virtue of her leadership of the UCP, right? If, she intentionally keeps herself out of touch with her members in favor of the little cabal of billionaires that, that support her and have her on speed dial. Right. Guys like Sam Murray, who's, that we all, have heard about, flying Danielle around the world and meeting up with Danielle in Dubai and, on and on and on, right? All these stories that are floating around in the news, about that relation. Deals being cut by Rob Anderson with buddies of his that were at his wedding party and, all of this crap that's going on in the background.
The lobbying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of it, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
sick of it. That's not the system we want to perpetuate in a free and independent Alberta. We want to have checks and
See,
balances. We want an elected Senate. We want an elected legislature. We want an elected executive, and with all of the branches putting checks and balances on one another. We want an elected attorney general and an elected auditor general who are responsible for putting crooked politicians in jail, right?
yeah, we need that. Yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, all of that, right? And
Yep.
so little groups floating around. Oh, we want to maintain the Westminster parliamentary system. It's like, why?
I
Right?
don't know. Yeah, I don't get it either.
Govern me harder, Daddy.
Yeah,
Govern me
that's pretty
harder.
well. Yeah,
Right?
I mean, well, you're right when you say that. And I mean that see, this was question number 11 actually, was how can we keep and unite the Alberta independence movement? And I see that too. Like you guys have done, like you said, a lot of the hard work, right? You forged a legal pathway forward. And to me, I do believe that it's very important to try and keep unity in the Alberta independence movement until we, like, you got to achieve certain milestones. And then it's like when the 13 colonies, I don't know, it's like with the United States too, when they strove for their independence too, right? I mean, you've got to work together. We got to try and unite, I would say, on certain key points. Like you said too, there's a lot of people that have shown leadership out there canvassing, and everyone has their different opinions and views, but the key question is how do we stay united? And I think it's very important to remain united.
Oh, absolutely,
And
absolutely. But like I said, it doesn't help when you have all of these groups running around,
yeah, that's right.
trying to be
Yeah.
in charge, and then you've got all the backbiting. I don't want him in charge. He's not very nice. I don't like his sense of
Yeah,
humor.
no,
I
yeah,
don't like, whatever.
yeah,
It's like nobody's in charge, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like everybody just needs to get over themselves. And
yeah.
and again, all of these people running around with all of these groups where people don't want to go on record and, oh, I don't want anybody to know who I am. You know what? If you're not willing to put your name on it, and if you're not willing to stand
I
up in the
agree.
light, and all you want to be is some shadowy, billionaire in the background, pulling strings and telling people what to do. A big part of our movement is that Albertans are sick of this bullshit. We've had too much
Yeah,
of this in this province, and the whole point of of a free and independent Alberta is to do away with all of that, right? So that the
yeah,
billionaires are told, hey, guess what? Like you have one vote, same as everybody else, right? And
exactly.
and you're not going to be manipulating things in the background anymore. Offering people like Jason Kenney board seats or whatever it is to make
Yeah,
favorable rulings in your favor when you're in government. I mean that
that's
whole.
right.
I mean, ATCO. I mean, it's well known that ATCO, was involved in, grossly overbilling Albertans on their electrical bills, right? So, they
Hmm.
get fined, whatever. But Jason Kenney, when he's premier, made sure that nothing bad happens to Nancy Southern, who anybody that works at ATCO knows that light bulbs don't get changed around there without Nancy's say so. I mean, she's like in charge of everything, right?
Okay.
And nobody that's worked at ATCO believes that that Nancy Southern didn't know what was going on. But Jason Kenney managed to keep her out of it. There was never an order made forcing ATCO to repay all of the money that that they overbilled Albertans. Right? They got their fine, but they still came out millions, if not tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars ahead. And lo and behold, Jason Kenney gets booted out of office, and now he's on the board of ATCO, right?
Well,
Running around the
exactly.
province with Nancy Southern talking about how dangerous Alberta independence is and how it's driving
Yeah,
business away
yeah,
from
dangerous for
Alberta,
maybe the just
right?
accountability with regards to themselves. Like that. See, you're a voice of accountability and conscience to me. See, and they don't like it. You know a lot of things. Like you know a lot. And see, to me, you're bringing that to light and they don't like it. It's like darkness doesn't like the light, right? Because you're talking about things that are true, that you can prove, and like it breaks the spell, right, of the commercial they project like on the
Well, it's part of the public.
masses.
I mean, all this stuff, all of this stuff is public record.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people get really upset with me, or like when, oh, you
You
know,
broke up a little bit there, but
nobody's going to sue me. Like, no, I said nobody's going to sue me on a lot of this stuff because I mean, the Globe and Mail has reported on it, right? Like,
yeah.
a lot of and I don't want to get into a whole, a whole bunch of, like, listen, I'm not just here to, we're going to hang out slinging dirt this morning. But I mean,
Yeah.
so much of this, so much of the nonsense that I talk about is all public record, right? It's not, these aren't big
Yeah.
secrets, like the identity of the lawyer that brokered the big coal deal and the $100 million plus payments to the coal companies that had to give up their coal licenses. It's no secret that the lawyer that brokered that deal, was in Rob Anderson's wedding party,
Hmm.
right? And then,
Sure.
open speculation as to whether or not he was paid on a contingency or not. Like, and I
Well,
mean,
that's yeah.
while at the same time, the government of Alberta absolutely refuses to settle the claims of all of the Alberta businesses that were illegally shut down by Jason Kenney during COVID. I mean, we have a massive class action lawsuit outstanding against the Alberta government,
Good for
right?
you.
But
Yeah.
again, welcome to Alberta, right? If you're,
Yeah.
if you're one of the little people that they've screwed over or crushed with their stupidity, and let's face it, I mean, Jason Kenney, shutting down mom and pop businesses and
Uh,
little
it's
lash
criminal.
clinics and massage,
Yeah.
massage therapists and physiotherapists and all this stuff during COVID, costing Albertans hundreds of millions of dollars. That was
Yeah.
all illegal. We have a court order saying that was all illegal. Why aren't these people being compensated for the damages that they suffered as a result of Jason Kenney's orders, right? But
Yeah.
no, we can't pay the little guy, right? Heaven forbid, because that could cost Alberta, a couple $1 billion. But oh yeah, we're happy to write checks to to multinational coal companies and other people that that the legislature could simply legislate these claims out of existence, right?
No, I mean,
They're happy to pay these people, but they won't take care of Alberta small businesses that they completely screwed over during COVID in favor of all the big box stores and everybody else in the province.
yeah,
It
that's
was
right.
allowed
Well,
to
look at
do operate.
Macus too, like Dr. William Macus. Look what happened to him with his cancer research. I mean, I followed his story off and on throughout the years, but I mean, he's a prime example. And my understanding now he's in Florida, right? But I mean, there's all kinds of things going on with his case. I don't know if you know him personally, but you can comment on that too if you'd like. I mean,
Well,
what the government?
I know Bill, and I don't want to I don't want to get into your
Sure,
outspoken.
yeah, no, we
I
don't
don't
have
want
to
to
go
get
there.
into too much in and around that. I mean, I haven't represented Bill, as legal
Okay.
counsel. Obviously, he
Yeah.
has he's had his struggles, with everything that was going on in Alberta. And again, they drove one of the Canada's top oncologists out
Yeah.
of Alberta to Florida, and I mean it's
Yeah.
for what? Because he didn't agree with the prevailing, orthodoxy. I mean, I have a client who will remain nameless that the College of Physicians and Surgeons was persecuting for years, alleging that he had engaged in misinformation during COVID. And
Yeah. That's right.
dozens of letters to the college saying, "Can you please specify what he said that constitutes misinformation?" Right? And
Yeah.
after
Sure.
years of writing them, saying like, we want some specificity as to what this alleged misinformation is, because here's a study, here's a study, here's a study, here's all this stuff proving that what he says is true. After like 4 or 5 years of this, they finally had to drop the charges against him, because
Yeah.
obviously everything he said was not misinformation, right? So all of that
Exactly.
stuff is going on, and Danielle and her government, and again, I lay the blame squarely where it belongs, at the feet of Rob Anderson. Rob Anderson doesn't want anybody talking about this stuff. Like he
Of course
doesn't.
they don't. Yeah. No, of
No,
course they
because
don't.
it's embarrassing to the government, and all Rob wants to do is get Danielle through the next election and win the next election.
Sure.
But principles, morals, people that have been hurt along the way be damned, right?
Yeah. That's right.
And people are fed up with it. I mean, people are really sick and tired of it.
No, for sure. And thanks for weighing in a little bit on that too. And of course, with myself, I mean, I went through all this too, and it just, like, the things that I remember, the three main lies, as far as I'm concerned, was they told me, well, you get the jabs and then you'll be immune and you won't transmit the virus and then you won't get infected, which to me are all factually, like,
Oh,
those statements.
those are all lies, right?
Exactly. All of
Safe,
it. Yeah.
safe and effective, biggest lie ever.
Yeah.
I keep laughing. I posted it more than once on X,
Yeah.
but I
I know.
can't wait to see the new Remain in Canada slogan, right? Canada, safe and effective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Right?
I like that one. That's good. Yeah.
We know that's a lie, right?
Well, we're on the same page. Yeah, okay. Well, let's steer back towards the independence thing. But I heard you were swatted. Like that's one of the questions I had
Oh
for you.
yeah, but you know what? That's I mean, as far as it goes, what happened, and we think that somebody went online, got our fax number off of our
Okay.
website, um,
Yeah,
hooked it up to a VP, like spoofed our number onto a VPN and dialed 911, right?
I see.
And
Okay.
and again, we've checked with TELUS, like, because they can tell whether and
Yeah.
it's our fax line, right? So it's like, who uses a fax anymore to actually use that number to send a fax or to dial out? It's actually hooked up through one of our photocopiers. You have to have more technical capacity
Okay.
and put in various codes and other stuff to be able to access this number to send out, anything on that line, right?
Yeah.
So, so again, we're positive that it didn't come, it wasn't something inadvertent that came from our office. And apparently, I didn't know this, but technically, TELUS is able to, look at various lines and look at the history of what's going out on the lines, and they can tell whether or not a 911 call was made from a number. So no
Okay.
911 call was actually, according to TELUS, was made, off of our
Hmm.
fax, off of our fax
Okay. So you
line,
looked into that.
right?
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, just coincidentally, the very minute that one of our local RCMP officers, and we had some issues like with that last snow we had. One of our
Yeah.
snowplow guys dug up the driveway and broke the electrical cable that opens and closes the gates on the front of the office. So anyway, this
Okay.
poor RCMP officer, was very concerned for us, and we were very grateful to him for the
Yeah.
concerns. We have obviously lots of death threats and lots of crazy
Yeah. No. You. Yeah.
crazy Lucasic people threatening me with death, threatening my office, threatening staff, and so on. So anyway, the RCMP responded very quickly to
Okay.
this 911 call out of concern. So, just coincidentally, this left-wing agitator happened to be driving by on, my office gate
Right.
when, the RCMP pulled into the front of the gate, and, it had to climb over the fence to go to our office to make sure everybody was okay. So it
Okay.
wasn't like a full, whatever, but it wasn't,
Yeah.
like a full SWAT team. I'm sure that's
Okay.
whoever did that intended that, right?
Yeah. I'm sure they did.
And I mean, I guess they don't realize
Crazy.
if you live in rural Alberta that you don't get SWAT, you get you get one intrepid RCMP constable
Okay.
coming out,
Yeah.
coming out to make sure you're okay and running towards what potentially could be danger. And again, I was very grateful to him for our constable for doing that, right?
Yeah.
Wasted his time, wasted our time, and of course, this one little lefty just happened to be there, so he
Oh
could
yeah.
post about it on Twitter, and
Yeah.
insinuate that there's
That's
something
right.
untoward going on at my office, and all this nonsense. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they do. I mean, it's like Luke
Yeah.
Kasic's latest bullshit. After 12 police cars show up at a Centurion meeting in Edmonton, and now Luke
Yeah.
Kasic is alleging that somehow or other that people on our, on the independence movement have legally accessed voters lists, right? So, and again, state for the record, Stay Free Alberta, Alberta Prosperity Project. We don't have voters lists. We, we
No.
do, all the people that support us have contacted us, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it's,
Hmm.
it's just nonsense. But that's what they've done throughout, right? They want to intimidate, harass.
Well, they'll find anything. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. They'll use anything. Yeah.
right?
That's
It's
right. I
yeah.
mean, what's
But I
okay?
can't.
What?
But I'm telling you what, I can't wait for Monday. Like
Yeah.
it's
No
going to be,
kidding.
when we turn in the signatures and we start
Yes.
publishing the numbers, right? So we're
Yeah.
going to be and we're going to be publishing. I think what the intention is to publish a constituency by constituency breakdown as to the
Nice.
number of signatures that we have in these constituencies. And I mean,
Nice.
it's going to shake the establishment of the UCP to its core. Because,
Good.
like, I'll give you some preliminary numbers as an
Okay.
example, right?
Yeah.
Rocky Mountain House Sundry, right?
Okay.
18,000 people voted UCP in the last election, right?
Okay.
For Jeremy Nixon, right? Guess how many
Sure.
signatures? Guess how many signatures came out of Rocky Mountain House Sundry?
I'm assuming it'll be a lot. Yeah. But
14,000.
oh wow.
Right?
Out of the eight. Wow. That's
Over 80% of the vote
wow.
in the last
That's
election
great. Yeah. That's great.
actually came out with their ID, signed their name to a petition, right?
Yeah,
Olds Didsbury, 14,000 people voted for Tara Sawyer, the UCP candidate,
That's great.
in the last by-election, right? Guess how many people signed the petition in Olds Didsbury?
I
11,000 people
there you go.
signed the petition
Wow.
in Olds Didsbury, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's awesome.
right? I mean, Lloydminster, right? 8,000 people voted for the UCP candidate in the last election, right? 5,500 people signed the petition in Lloydminster. So everywhere we're going in these ridings across these constituencies across Alberta, we're basically seeing that at least 80% of the UCP vote actually signed the petition. So what does that tell you about the level of support, in these constituencies for for Alberta independence? It's certainly higher than any, Janet Brown poll or Ecos poll or, whatever it is, right?
Sure, yeah.
And certainly
Yeah.
it's going to should be sending a very strong message to Danielle Smith that she's not going to get reelected premier without the support of the Alberta independence movement and people that favor a free and independent Alberta. So
I agree.
so I think this nonsense about I want a United Canada and free, strong Alberta, the United Canada stuff has
I
to
know.
stop, right? It just irritates her base, right, at a visceral level. People are sick of it. We don't want to remain part of a United Canada. Like, what's Canada done for us? Like, it's like you're hugging somebody who's constantly punching you in the side of the head, right? Like,
well, we're sugar daddy, like we're
right?
sugar daddy, and on top of that, like we don't get to govern ourselves either. It's just here's all this money, and then basically, Eastern Canada essentially is telling Alberta how to govern itself, which it's people have had enough.
People in Alberta want to see a balanced budget. We have
Yeah.
news flash for Danielle Smith. The quickest way to balance a budget in Alberta is to vote Alberta out of Canada and stop sending money to Ottawa. Right? Seriously,
Yeah.
and on top of it, like if you read, and I think it's important for your, for your viewers and people watching this interview, please go to albertaprosperityproject.com and download a document called The Value of Freedom. Okay, a value of freedom draft fiscal plan for an independent Alberta. And what that document shows is that combining all tax revenue leaving Alberta, CPP and UI, we send $70 billion a year to Ottawa. $70 billion a year to Ottawa.
Huge.
Right?
Yeah,
we get
huge.
less than $10 billion back in direct cash transfers, largely for healthcare, right? And $10 billion a year back in questionable federal services, whatever they are, right? So that's, that leaves $50 billion that leaves Alberta, to not come back. Right, and that $20 billion includes CPP and UI payments coming back to Alberta. Right, so we send out $70 billion, we get less than 20 back. Right, that's the math.
Yeah.
So think about how much better off Alberta is going to be with an extra $50 billion a year staying in Alberta. Right. We can afford, we can afford to stand up in Alberta Armed Forces at 3% of GDP. We can afford to. We can afford to substantially, in very least in year one, cut everybody's income taxes in half, right? With a view towards moving forward to zero income tax, zero corporate tax in Alberta, moving forward, right?
Why not?
We're the only jurisdiction in Canada that can afford to do that, right? And for all these people that, go, oh, well, Alberta can't make it on its own, whatever, like, why do you think it's such a great idea that we continue to send $15 billion a year to Quebec, right? Quebec cheats the system. They're a parasite. They're a drain on, the entire country, and they do it intentionally, right? And I've seen studies and I've seen numbers. I mean, all Quebec would have to do is increase the cost of electricity or what they charge for electricity in Quebec by, 5 or 10 cents per kilowatt hour, right? And they could balance their budgets without any equalization from the rest of the country, right? The other thing that they do that people need to be aware of, Ontario, British Columbia, Newfoundland, they all do it as well. They have found a way to cheat the equalization system by exempting their hydro revenue from the equalization calculation, right? And the way that they do that is they put a phony price on water as it goes over or through their hydroelectric dams, right? So they'll say, let's say notionally, oh, well, the natural resource is the water, and we charge a penny an acre foot to, Hydro Quebec, Ontario One, Hydro Newfoundland, BC Hydro, whatever, right? And all of the profits that are generated by these hydro corporations, those are the profits of crown corporations. The profits of crown corporations are exempt from the equalization calculation. Most people don't know that. So
No.
they're effectively cheating Albertans, right? By by exempting all other hydro revenue from the calculation. And then when you look at the perennial have-nots like the Maritimes, and again Quebec, they have massive natural gas resources that they have failed to develop because they haven't needed to, because sugar daddy Alberta is constantly paying their bills for them, right? I mean, everybody would be so much better off without Alberta's money, because it would force them to develop their own industries, force them to develop their own natural gas. I mean, Quebec, talk to Marty. He was involved in, developing a lot of those gas fields that Quebec subsequently stole and then shut in, right?
Okay.
Massive amounts of natural gas in Quebec, massive amounts of natural gas in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, right? That they haven't developed because of backwards, government of Canada policies.
Yeah, that's right.
Quebec, all this climate fraud nonsense, that we've been.
It's a shame,
right? Et cetera, et cetera. So, that's what we're dealing with. And quite frankly, like I've been saying, we think the rest of Canada is going to be substantially better off without Alberta, because it's going to force them, to reduce all of their wasteful government spending. It's going to force them to, provinces to develop, their own resources. It's going to force people to actually get back to basics, which is having, small, effective government, low deficits, low debt, pay down the debt loads, pay down the deficit loads, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's not happening now because they don't have to, because Alberta's paying the bills.
I like how you've brought that point up and the way that you described that, because it's like it keeps a person in a place where they just stay on that welfare type of a system, if you will. And like you've emphasized the point that if we take that money away, then it'll actually force these other provinces, to actually say, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. We got to develop our own industries, which is like, that's what you should be doing. I mean, that's basically kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So, yeah, I mean, like, okay, so why not the 51st state then? I mean, you've touched like this whole 51st state thing. I know there's not many people that really are advocating for that, but there's some. I don't think that's the right pathway for us. I've heard I don't know, like the arguments why some people want to do it, but what's your take on all that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have to say I kind of fed into some of this nonsense myself, because what happened was, and this goes back to March of last year, 2025.
Yeah.
So I'm at a COVID, I'm at an injection of truth conference put on by Fish Creek Constituency Association, right?
I heard about that, yeah.
Speaking about, the illegal COVID orders and what we need to do going forward, and whatever. And Dave Parker's wife, Rachel Emmanuel Parker, is there as a journalist. And she goes, "Hey, Jeff," she said, "you're always doing really interesting stuff. Is there anything that you're doing that's not COVID related?" And I said, "Wow." I said, "Funny that you would ask that. I'm in the midst of talking to Modri about putting together a delegation of prominent Albertans to go down to Washington, D.C. to discuss whether or not Washington, D.C. would give Alberta a better deal as a U.S. state as opposed to staying in Canada, right?" And
you went and did it.
It was a thought exercise, right? And so Rachel, "Oh my goodness," she goes, "Would you be interviewed about that?" And I said, "Sure, I don't have a problem with it. Sure, I'll do your interview." And so Rachel does this little 2-minute clip with her phone. She posts it on X. Of course, it gets picked up by Charlie Kirk and says, "Charlie Kirk, what a great idea, blah, blah, blah." Elon Musk picks up on it. "Oh, yeah, of course, it's a no-brainer kind of thing, whatever."
And then just spread.
Next thing you know, this little 2-minute video clip of Rachel Parker's gets over 100 million combined views.
Okay, yeah.
On X,
that's how quickly it happens,
YouTube, on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
And, and then I end up on Fox News and, on and on. And of course, to be absolutely clear, because I was working at the time with Rob Anders and other people, I mean, we didn't want, we were not seriously pursuing Alberta becoming the 51st state. There's a bunch of reasons for that. First and foremost is what, Sarah Palin told Rob Anders when he was talking to her about how Alaska became a state. And she told Rob, she said, listen, you got to understand, it wasn't a done deal that Alaska was going to become a state, because we were a U.S. territory. And as a U.S. territory, without congressional representation, without Senate seats, et cetera, we don't have to pay we didn't have to pay U.S. federal income tax. Because, of course, don't forget, they fought a revolution over no taxation without representation. So Puerto Ricans, citizens of Guam, all the U.S. territories, U.S. Virgin Islands, they don't pay U.S. income tax. And of course, Rob Anders and everyone why would we want to join the states? Seriously, if there was to be, some sort of real union, with the U.S., we'd be far better off as a territory or protector, whatever, or alternatively, none of us were really interested in any of those things. We just wanted to have what the old European common market used to be before all the EU bureaucrats ruined it. Basically have Alberta as an independent country with zero tariffs between Alberta and the United States, free flow of goods and people across the Alberta U.S. border, et cetera, and have thriving economies on both sides of the border, but Alberta maintaining, its independence. Sure. Because who wants to be governed, again, we get rid of Ottawa, 3,500 miles away. They don't understand us. They don't like us, whatever. Who wants to be governed by bureaucrats in Washington? Right? Let alone, heaven forbid, somebody as idiotic as, Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris or whoever becomes president.
Well, they're more likely to join Canada the way I see it.
Right? Well, I mean, it's just, so, we've been clear from the outset, at the start of this movement, that we're not interested in joining the United States. Even from our first meeting, with the U.S. State Department, we made it very clear that we were there to talk about a free and independent Alberta and not statehood. And interestingly, the State Department officials we were meeting with said, oh, that's good that you clarified that at the outset, because we're on exactly the same page. Alberta would never be admitted into statehood because of the politics of the U.S. It would, requires a 2/3 vote in the U.S. Senate. The Democrats in the Senate would never vote to allow what would be effectively another Republican state to U.S. and change the balance of power in the Senate. If the Democrats were to allow another Republican state in, they would likely want Guam, Puerto Rico, and perhaps a constitutional amendment to allow Washington, D.C. into statehood. That would never happen. So any idea of Alberta ever becoming a state is completely
off. That's what they said.
Completely off the table. So from day one, there has never been, officially within the independence movement, any intention, of joining the United States, right? And to the extent that I contributed to that not misinformation, but that misunderstanding. I mean, I'll take ownership of that. But again, it started out as more as a thought exercise and more as just sort of a public.
Yeah, that's fine.
Wouldn't it be interesting to find out from the U.S.?
I like the fact that you did.
And I mean,
you went and did it.
We've had several meetings with the U.S. State Department since. We're on very, very good terms with the Trump administration, and we're very pleased with that relationship, and it's paying dividends, right? I mean, we're going down there, and we're just private citizens, right? We have no ability to enter into agreements with the U.S. We're not proposing agreements with the United States, whatever. We don't have the authority to do that. We're simply citizens of Alberta that are meeting with officials in Washington and explaining to them what the aspirations are of people within the Alberta independence.
And that's fine.
For a free and independent Alberta. Completely legitimate. It doesn't amount to foreign interference. We're not soliciting involvement of the United States in our politics. They haven't given us a nickel. We pay our own way there and we pay our own way back. Et cetera, et cetera. We're not agents of the CIA. We're not agents.
You'll get all that. Yeah.
all of that nonsense that people are spewing, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah.
what it's doing, but I want to speak to that, right?
Yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah.
It's paying dividends, right? So we go down to, we're in Washington and we're explaining to the U.S. State Department that, aspirationally, Alberta needs to get out of the stranglehold that Canada and specifically British Columbia has over getting Alberta oil and gas to Tidewater, right? So we're saying, aspirationally, it'd be wonderful for a free and independent Alberta to have a pipeline that goes straight south into Montana and then takes a hard right to the west coast through Idaho, Montana, Idaho, and then either Washington or Oregon, so that we can ship Alberta oil and gas or refined products to the California market, the Pacific Rim, actual allies of Alberta and Canada, Korea, Japan, etc. As opposed to landlocking all of our oil and gas in place as the strategic petroleum reserve of communist China, which is effectively what the Marxist Kenney government is
What's
doing,
that?
right? So anyway, and the funny thing about that is, so we have that meeting, we're talking to them about this aspirationally, and of course, people in this meeting, as we're meeting at a very high level, are going directly from our meeting to the Oval Office, right? And obviously, people in Washington talk. So obviously, people that were in our meetings, we're talking to Scott Bessent, the U.S. Secretary Treasury, about the aspirations of Alberta, a free and independent Alberta for a pipeline to the U.S. West Coast and so on. So not 3 weeks after our last meeting, Scott Bessent is being interviewed by Jack Prosobiec down in Texas, and Bessent, gleefully says, "Oh, and I understand that there's this independence movement in Alberta, and that they would like to see a pipeline to the West Coast. We would welcome that, right? And I've even heard that there might be a referendum this year, right?" And he's very very gleeful about it, right? So obviously, the content of our meetings in terms of the aspirations of a free and independent Alberta are being briefed to the highest level of the Trump cabinet. I mean, anybody that understands the power of, anybody that understands the power of the U.S. Treasury Secretary understands that he's literally the second most powerful man in the Trump administration, right? Minor changes in Treasury policy can bankrupt nations. I mean, if Scott Bessent wanted to shut down Canada tomorrow, they would just have to pass, they could pass a bunch of regulations, banning U.S. pension funds and U.S. companies from investing in the Canadian stock market,
That's right,
or whatever. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of power that the U.S., I don't know if they'd ever do it, but that's the kind of power that the U.S. Treasury Secretary, could wield, right? And people in this country just simply don't understand that. But, other than, I'm pretty sure that David Eby did, because, of course, immediately following Bessent's announcement or discussion with Prosobiec, that's when Eby started screaming about how I was treasonous and, I'm a traitor. They're traitors, they're treasonous.
Oh, yeah, we're all called that. Yeah.
Because we were taking his power away. There's David Eby. I have a veto, and no Alberta oil will go through BC without my say-so, whatever, right? And all of a sudden, we have an option. And Eby's spitting mad because we're telling him, like, you're not the boss of us, dude. Like, no, he's like little Eric Cartman. So it's like this is like Doug Ford, but it's like, respect my authority. You must respect my authority, right? And no, we don't have to respect your authority. You don't have any authority over us. You're a pissant provincial premier that thinks they have a lot more power than they do. And Alberta independence is a complete answer to you, right? I mean, and all this nonsense, so I want to address it because it always comes up. This idea that somehow or other that Alberta would be landlocked as a free and independent country. That's complete nonsense. We would have more ability to get our goods to the ocean as a free and independent country than we have now, because we're landlocked by policy. We're policy locked by Canada, British Columbia, all of this nonsense, these nonsense groups alleging they have a veto over pipeline construction, this so-called Coastal First Nations group, which is really, just a Chinese communist funded NGO. I mean, they're funded by the Tides Foundation, George Soros. So, I mean, they've got ties to communist China.
Yeah, that's how it works. That's right.
Yang, right? So,
yeah.
We're landlocked by, all these Chinese communist affiliated groups now. But if Alberta were to become independent, think about the leverage we'd have over British Columbia, right? So, it's like, Alberta's a rat-free province. Well, we want to keep it rat-free. So every single train and truck coming out of British Columbia could be stopped at the Alberta border for 2 or 3 weeks. We could inspect it for rats, right? Then we can send our custom inspectors on board, and we can assess a throughput tariff on all of the BC goods going through to Ontario, right? Or BC could be reasonable and just let us have another pipeline or two, and we'd be fine, right? But but again, we don't have that leverage right now because Ottawa is in the way, right? Preventing Alberta from being able to block trade, goods coming out of British Columbia under interprovincial trade, right, under the Canadian Constitution. But a free and independent Alberta could certainly tell British Columbia, that, hey, you need us as much or more than we need you because we have alternative routes through the United States. You either play ball with us or we can make your lives a living hell, right? Take your pick. Cooler heads are going to prevail. They're not going to be happy about it. But at the same time, that's the power of a free and independent Alberta. And that's what none of these people want to acknowledge. Like, I don't understand why anybody in Alberta would want to continue to maintain the status quo. I mean, what is all of this nostalgia in and around the Canadian flag worth to you? Right? Is it, you want to keep paying, 2 or 3 times the amount of taxes that you should be paying? You want to continually be over-regulated and, told what to do by politicians in Ottawa that don't understand you, don't like you, don't care for you, look down on you. You want to continue that toxic relationship for what reason? Because little Tommy the Commie Lukasic says that I love Canada and I love the Canadian flag. And when I left communist Poland, I came to communist Canada to make my heart warm. Give me a break, right? I mean, it's ludicrous, right?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a lot of you make a really good case, and I don't think people have the understanding clearly that you have, right? I mean, you understand how the system works, and like that. I mean, part of the issue too with anyone talking to the United States right now, I mean, a large majority of especially Eastern Canadians, they're suffering from. I think I don't know if you coined the term, but it was TDS, right? The Trump Derangement Syndrome and AIDS. Right.
I came up with AIDS. I'll take credit for that.
Alberta, I mean, I've heard
Independence Derangement Syndrome.
And
a lot of them, I say a lot of them have full-blown AIDS, like full-blown Alberta Independence Derangement Syndrome, because they refuse to acknowledge how much better off we're going to be as a free and independent country. And then they just start sputtering, right? Like, we're being hated by the United States. Donald Trump is a bad man. Like, I was actually in court with a lawyer, right?
Okay.
No less. Who, was in court saying things like Donald Trump was elected by the Russians and Venezuela, Greenland, Iran, American imperialism. This is why we, blah, 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 right? So
really, I mean,
it's full-blown AIDS. I mean, Alberta Independence Derangement Syndrome. I mean, none of that stuff has any place in a courtroom. But, there's,
I wouldn't think so.
Sputtering about how, Alberta independence has to be stopped and the petition process has to stop because foreign interference and la, la, la. And of course, one of the chiefs that's involved in this current court case, a guy by the name of Alan Adam, you can find it online. He's publicly admitted to being engaged in foreign interference because he's funded by the Tides Foundation. And he actually uses the word foreign interference. Yeah, I've done foreign interference. I got $55,000 to bring a court case, and I'm getting funded by the Tides Foundation, and then that, right? So, I mean, it's ludicrous. I mean, we know who's getting foreign funding. It's not us, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I know exactly to the nickel. What where the money is coming from Stay Free Alberta and the Alberta Prosperity Society. And, there, you can't help, when you've got online donations, and this isn't like, the U.S. or U.S. election where, money going to, groups like the Alberta Prosperity Society as an example. If a foreign person donates $10 or $20 or $50 or something, you have to return the money, right? Because it's marginal, right? The vast amount of the percentage of the money that we bring in, either through APS or Stay Free Alberta, has all come from Alberta grassroots donations and grassroots donations from people in other provinces. But I think it's something like more than 95 or 98% of it comes directly from everyday grassroots Albertans. We're talking thousands, not tens of thousands from the rest of the country. And I think it's less than 0.068% came from foreign sources in small donations. No major donations from any foreign entities or foreign.
Yeah, I mean, you're being honest about it. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's good. Like, I mean, what it like, yeah, it's just like I said too. I'm going to go back to this too. I don't think a lot of people. Well, I would say a good third of people understand why it would definitely be better to become independent. But like, I just find that like I'm going into like taxation, right? Like, it's a multifaceted word to me. It's an interesting word, but it's a word used like by our governing officials, like to basically like I call it borderline like legalized sanctioned like white collar governmental theft on the people, right? It's just finding new ways to take more money away from hardworking everyday people, right? And to me, it's just like with what I've read from what you guys want to do with the Alberta Prosperity Project, right? Like, I mean, it just basically you're reducing this like dramatically. So why wouldn't you want to do these things, right? Instead of like going down Carney's path where it's just going to get worse. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and one of the fun ones, I actually wore it this morning intentionally. You see my 101st Airborne pin right on my lapel. So
Okay.
because
Nice.
and that drives the conspiracy theorists
Oh,
nuts.
yeah, good. Yeah.
The United States of America, blah 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 blah.
There you go.
And the story behind it is actually kind of a fun story. So when I was a kid, I was a combat engineer, right?
Nice.
And in 1983, I was on an exercise called Rendezvous 83 or RV 83 in Wainwright, which was a divisional level exercise involving Canadian, British, American
Okay.
troops. Just ripping up Wainwright from one end to the other, right?
Yeah.
A-10, B-52s, and I mean, you name it. It was awesome, right? So anyway, as part of this exercise, as a combat engineer, myself and my platoon or troop had wired a Bailey bridge with thousands of pounds of plastic explosives to put it in orbit as part of this exercise, right? So
Really nice.
myself and a couple guys in my regiment ended up being assigned or seconded to the 101st Airborne Regiment as the bridge guard on this demolition that we did, right? So basically,
Nice.
I was, I had the honor of serving with the 101st for a couple weeks in the middle of this exercise in Wainwright as part of this bridge detail where we got to blow this Bailey Bridge into orbit, as part of the exercise, right? So, but anyway, so years later, I was, driving to and from the Calgary airport, and there's this really, really awesome guy. We became friends because I was leaving, leaving to and from the airport like, 2, 3, 4 times a week, and he's a commissioner at the airport, right? And he and I were chatting, and we were talking about our respective military service, and he told me that he had served with the 101st, but I said, I served with the 101st briefly when I was a kid, and I told him the story, whatever. And he gave me this pin, and
Nice.
He since passed away. But I mean, I've worn it, and I've been very proud of it ever since. And I wear it as a reminder of the service, because this was like 1984, so the Cold War was still on. The Berlin Wall hadn't been torn down, or 1983. The Berlin Wall had not been torn down. Actually, I served in Germany in 84, right? Prior to the Berlin Wall coming down, as part of the NATO to Germany. It was awesome, right? Rumbling around Bavaria in the back of an armored personnel carrier for months on end.
Nice.
no better place for for a 20-something-year-old kid that
Yeah.
liked to blow stuff up, right? It was awesome. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So
That's
anyway,
cool, man.
so that's where this comes from, and I still wear it to this day. In recognition of all of those people, that literally, that volunteered to serve to fight communism. Because that's what we were doing. We were, we had all, we're literally all on the line, lining up against the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union and, what was then the forces of evil in the world, which have now, literally through the World Economic Forum taken over our government,
Yeah,
that we're trying
100%.
to, get away
Yeah.
from, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because
So,
that's exactly
so
how
that's
they're doing
that's that's the story of of my 101st Airborne pin. But I thought I should put it on the record because this loser
it. Yeah.
reporter by the name of Johnny Wakefield in Edmonton. I was going into court the other day and I didn't have my
Oh,
101st Airborne pin on the lapel of my jacket. And he said, "I have a question for you." And I said, "Okay, you know who I am?" I said, "Oh yeah, you're Johnny Wakefield, right? I know who you are." And like I was thinking to myself, "Yeah, you're a useless turd that never gets it right." But okay, like, what's your question? Why
yeah.
aren't you wearing the 101st Airborne pin today? And I looked him right in the eye and I said, if your question is that stupid, I have nothing else to say to you. Goodbye. And I turned around and walked away from him. But I mean, that's how stupid some of these people are. I mean, it's like, let's
Yeah.
make a story. Let's try to make a story out of
Well, and
nothing.
that's what they do. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's
They
what
just
that's
run with
what
it.
we do, and let's spew a bunch of misinformation and a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
Um, it just it's just anyway. The people on the other side of this thing are just so ridiculous that it doesn't
Well,
even.
yeah, no, there's a complete lack of respect. Like you want to engage someone intelligently, like even if you disagree, like that I'm all about a respectful exchange. And you
Well,
better
and
have your
it's like all those idiots with CBC, and even with all due
yeah,
respect to to Vashi Capellas, who I quite like, right? I mean, I don't know if you saw my
okay.
CTV interview with Vashi, but it was a lot of fun. But I mean, this whole
Yeah.
storyline that, well, aren't you afraid if Alberta becomes independent, you're going to be taken over by the United States? It's like that is such a stupid question, right? Like,
Hmm.
if the
Yeah, I don't
United
think
States wanted to take over Alberta tomorrow,
yeah, they
right?
could.
There's
Yeah.
nothing that Canada could do about it. I mean, like, again, getting back
Yeah.
to the 101st Airborne as an example, 101st Airborne is a fully mobile light infantry regiment that has over 18,000 men at arms, actively serving in the 101st Airborne Division. They have their own light or, armored
Hmm.
capacity. They have their own airlift capacity. They have their own helicopters, on and on and on and on. I mean, the 101st Airborne could take over Alberta tomorrow, and there's nothing that the government of Canada can do about it. And I
Yeah.
mean, and I say that with the greatest respect to Canada's fine infantry regiments. I have
Sure,
nothing but
yeah.
respect for people that have served in the Princess Patricia Light Infantry, as an example, based in Alberta, right?
Hmm.
Some of the
Yeah.
finest light infantry soldiers in the world, but there's only a couple thousand of them, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Like,
Yeah.
and I mean, and I was talking to my buddy, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Redmond, the other day, and he's actually doing a talk at Civitas tomorrow about the sorry state of readiness within the Canadian military. Like, we
Yeah.
have less than 7,000 troops that are capable that are combat effective, right? And capable of doing
That's
anything on a deployment. And all of the other numbers, like the so-called, 78,000 or 75,000 or whatever. I
yeah.
mean, they're all busy, like, they join the army so that they can transition. They join the,
Yeah,
military,
that's it's
whatever.
embarrassing.
They're obese, they're out of shape, they're unfit. They
Yeah.
can't, they don't meet basic PT standards. Now
Yeah.
I understand that they're recruiting people from West Africa. You can't even get them through a basic training course because they're more interested in killing one another than they are in training to be Canadian soldiers, et cetera. I
Yeah,
mean, I
no, it's
literally read
not
that article
it's
just the other day. I mean, they ran a basic training course in Quebec, and only 43% of them graduated for various reasons, disciplinary problems, illiteracy problems. Because when I say illiteracy, they can't read English or French to a level that would allow them to be trained to a level to become Canadian soldiers, right? Like,
yeah.
let's face it. I mean, if you can't read English or French, right?
That's
How can you read a training manual? How can you sit in a class and learn, how to use a mortar, how to use how to use plastic
desperation.
explosives, how to, how to operate, in a mine warfare environment, how to, whatever. You
Yeah.
need to be able to read and write. And You
for
know,
sure.
a lot of these people that they're recruiting can't read and write English or French,
Yeah.
right? So it's yeah, I mean it's a
Well, it's
really really
embarrassing. I mean, it just
oh
shows.
100%.
Yeah, it's
And then the
very
worst,
embarrassing.
you've got the Charles, gets a standing ovation from the U.S. Combined Houses of Congress, Senate and Congress, when he's talking about going to war with Ukraine with Russia. Like, who in Alberta wants to go to war with Russia, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah. I
really,
mean, it's
right?
not a, yeah.
And we're all so are people in Alberta going to be really happy when Mark Carney and King Charles have to institute a draft, so that actual, native born Albertans, can
Yeah,
be
they're going over there.
drafted into the Canadian military so that we can go die or so they can go die
Hmm.
in Ukraine. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, I honestly do not believe that the citizens of Alberta would support, being drafted to go fight in a
No, I
war
don't think
so
so.
that the liberal politicians can continue to bleed us dry through Ukrainian corruption, right?
Yeah. I mean, no,
You know,
there's, that's
it's
yeah,
insane.
a 100%.
It's absolute insanity.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, no, thanks for weighing in on that too. Let's go back to the white paper, and then there's a lot
The
of talk about the
white
white
paper, what white paper?
the white paper that I think Keith Wilson talks about this white paper that's supposed to be like, because you're talking about the value of freedom document, but then I was told there's supposed to be this white paper released before the vote in October 19th. Do you know what I'm talking about, or not really?
No, I mean Keith's kind of off doing his own thing. Like he's
Okay, so
busy.
that's Keith's thing.
He's busy trying to build his own little power base right now. I mean,
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I didn't
and
know.
he's kind of in. Like we're kind of concerned about it. It seems to us that he's kind of in cahoots with Danielle and Rob Anderson, and that causes us
Okay.
that causes a lot of us a lot of heartburn, right? And then when people are working with
Okay.
groups of unnamed billionaires, and they're
Okay.
the people that are working with them are in the shadows. It doesn't make those of us that have been working with the grassroots for the last year feel particularly warm and fuzzy, right? So
Okay. So this is
I mean, so at
okay.
this point, I guess the short answer is I'm not sure what Keith is doing. He's not keeping us in the loop, and it looks like
Okay. I didn't know that.
he's off doing his own thing for his own reasons, with his own people, that aren't necessarily
I didn't know that. Yeah. Okay.
our people, I guess is the best way to put it.
Okay. No, that's good to know because I wasn't sure. I thought you guys were on the same page with that. Okay, but that answers that question.
Yeah.
And what's okay? I just want to know what a clear majority is. Just like, hey, once all the signatures.
50% plus easy, 50% plus one, right? Is a clear
Okay.
majority.
So okay.
But again, they're going to be trying to argue and fight about it. I mean, don't
Yeah.
forget, Newfoundland surrendered its status as an independent dominion and joined Canada with like 52 point something percent, right? So
Yes, that's
that's
right.
good
Yeah.
enough for Newfoundland. It should be good enough for Alberta, right?
Okay.
And so that's kind of where I'm at on that one.
Okay. No, that's good. Yeah. I just wanted to know what you had to say about that. Um. I mean, we basically talked about, well, summarize the three most important reasons why we should advocate for an independent Alberta. Like, what's your three main top reasons why we should do this?
Well, freedom for one. I mean, like we live in a communist country now, where every
Okay.
time we turn around, we are subject to the whims of an elected dictatorship in Ottawa. Like,
Yeah.
we no longer live in a democratic country, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Carney didn't like the results of the last election. Canadians said, "We don't trust you with a majority. We don't want you to have a
Yeah.
majority." So
Yeah.
what's Mark Carney's response to that? I'm going to bribe, lie, cheat my way towards a majority government, whether you folks like it or not. And that's what
Yeah.
he's done. So we
And he
now live,
did that.
we
Yeah.
now live, it was bad enough before. At least the
Yeah.
conservatives had a majority, some say on committees and all the rest of it. But Mark Carney has now cheated his way to effectively, becoming the dictator of Canada. And we're sick and tired of living in a country of that nature. So that's number one for me.
Okay.
Number two, of course, is restoring, what used to be Canadian values. Now I guess they're just Alberta values. of freedom, common sense, freedom from overreach by government, getting rid of, liberal communist affiliated politicians like Jason Kenney, who think they can tell people how many friends they're allowed to have, lock people in their homes while they sit partying with their buddies, drinking liquor, at the Sky Palace while other people are locked in their houses. All of these animal farm politicians, where, some pigs are more equal than others. We want to get away from that. We want to, we want to restore the way Canada was governed, prior to
the old Canada. Yeah.
Yeah. We want to bring Alberta back to the principles that we all grew up under. Right.
Okay.
We want to restore some sanity, in the context of Alberta's immigration system. We don't think it's appropriate to be bringing people in on temporary foreign worker visas or international mobility program visas to make donuts and brew coffee and do jobs that used to go to high school kids and university students, right? And and have those businesses managed that way so that you can manage a workforce made up of part-time employees that getting their first jobs and all the rest of it, as opposed to what's going on now where we've got all these whether it's a Subway or a Tim Hortons or whatever it is, where they have this army of slave labor, effectively, people coming over here to work for 5 years at $15 an hour that can't do anything else, otherwise they're going to get shipped home, and then they bring their families over and and their kids are going to our schools at $10,000 a kid. They're going to or whatever the allotment is, $14,000 a kid, clogging our emergency rooms, etc.
Well, these are issues.
I was joking with a buddy of mine the other day. It's like, hey, I don't have any need to ever go to India or visit Mumbai. I just have to go to the emergency. You know what I mean? Like, seriously. I mean, you walk into an emergency room in Alberta and literally all you see in these emergency rooms are effectively new Canadians, half of whom are probably there on TFWs or IMP visas or whatever it is. So how much of that cost do you think that they're actually paying through their $15 an hour wage? Right. So, as for Danielle to say that she thinks we need to have a referendum on whether all of these employers should be forced to post a $50,000 bond for every one of these employees, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, she has the jurisdiction to do it now. She should do it now. I mean, this nonsense, that we're going to have a referendum on immigration in Alberta when,
I hear you.
It's like the house is on fire and Danielle says, oh, well, we're going to wait 6 months and then we're going to have a vote on whether to call the fire department. It's ludicrous, right?
So she could just deal with
it. And again, Alberta independence would lead to, control of our own immigration, a sensible program. I mean, anybody that's come here that has skills that we don't currently have in Alberta and that we need, doctors, nurses, engineers, welders, tradesmen, whatever, you're welcome. But if your only skill is that you can be quickly trained, to run a factory donut making machine and brew coffee, I think we've got lots of people in Alberta that can do that. And if we don't have enough people to do that, people can drive another mile or two, to another Tim Hortons. You don't need to open a new one, right? Let's face. This nonsense that we need to have this continued proliferation of fast food joints in Alberta. Peopled by the third world, because it suits various people's business models to have an unending supply of cheap third world labor as part of their business model. Well, the rest of society pays the cost, not just in hard dollars, but in loss of enjoyment of life, loss of amenities. Access to our parks, access to our hospitals, access to our public facilities, all of which are now overrun by people on TFWs and IMP visas. Enough is enough is enough. I mean, that's another, high up on the list of, of reasons for Alberta independence. Obviously, being able to reduce our income tax to zero,
that's a big one too.
A year or two of independence, right? Cutting up everybody's taxes in half in year one. Huge, a huge benefit to people in Alberta. And of course, what I challenge people on the other side, like I was having a discussion with this character, by the name of Don Braid, who calls me from time to time. He's a reporter or columnist with the Calgary Herald. And
Okay.
I don't know why he calls me, because I just give him the gears every time he does. But it's like, oh, hey, Don, you're looking for another, to be able to misquote me again on something. What kind of bullshit are you selling today? Kind
That's
of
good
stuff.
you talk to him like
And
that.
that's how I talk to him, right? My
That's
wife,
good.
people,
Yeah.
people just laugh, right? And of course,
Yeah.
last time I was talking to him, I said, Don, I said, listen, I said, I want you to tell me something, right? I said, I can name you dozens of reasons why Albertans are going to be so much better off in a free and independent Alberta, right?
Yeah.
Can you give me one good reason why Albertans are going to be better off if they vote to remain in Canada? And I said, don't give me any of this fear bullshit. Like, oh, you're going to be landlocked, or you're going to be this, and you're going to be blah, 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 blah. All this fear, fear, fear. I said, no fear. And I said, no nostalgia. So why are Albertans going to be better off financially if they vote to stay in Canada the day after independence, right? Well, I'm not the one being interviewed. You're being interviewed here. And it's like, no. I said, Don, we're having a conversation, right?
Yeah, sure.
And, I said, on the record, off the record, I don't care. I'm having a conversation with you as a human being. Give me 5 good reasons why Albertans will be better off the day after they vote no. And like all of these guys, well, and again, he avoids the question and whatever. And I said, Don, you're just ducking it, okay? And the reason you're ducking it is you don't have an answer. You can't answer the question. You don't have one good reason why Albertans are going to be better off financially the day they vote against independence, right? And well, maybe I'll write a column about that. That was 2 weeks ago. He still hasn't written a column about it, right? Because not one of them. I mean, I don't know whether you saw it or not, but I put out an open letter to Danielle Smith in my Substack. Oh, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago, right? And I challenged Danielle Smith publicly on the record to tell us, give us 5 good reasons. I can give you dozens. I listed them all the reasons why we're going to be better off financially the day we leave Canada. I said, just give us 5. Like I can list, we can list 20 why we're going to be better off when we leave Canada. Just give us 5 reasons why we're going to be better off financially if we stay. You're violating, Danielle, your fiduciary obligation to the citizens of Alberta by keeping us in this dysfunctional relationship that costs all of us money when we provided you, we haven't told you to download it. We physically delivered a copy of The Value of Freedom into your hands, right? You've read that document, excuse me. Why are Albertans, going to be better off if we stay in Canada? And if you can't tell us that, you're breaching your fiduciary duty to the people that elected you, right? And she refuses to internalize that. She refuses to give us one good reason why we would be better off. All we get from her are platitudes, right? Well, I believe it's strong. We don't care what you believe, Danielle. Like 65 or 70% of your members, want Alberta to be free and independent. I mean, that's why, and on top of it, she's trying to manage or mismanage the UCP membership to prevent us from being able to put on the record that we favor independence, right? So, for leading up to the UCP AGM last year, Danielle actually put forward and passed a motion at the UCP Board of Directors saying that there could not be any resolutions on the floor favoring independence, and that there would be no questions, at the UCP AGM with regard to, or no debate at the UCP AGM with regard to independence. So that's what prompted me to wait in line, grab the mic at a Bear Pit session.
I heard about that.
And say, this question isn't for Danielle and the collective cabinet. My question is for all of you in this room. Given that Danielle just signed a disastrous MOU with Canada, the ink wasn't dry. The next day, Carney's announced that MOU means a 600% increase in the industrial carbon tax in Alberta. How many people in this room now favor a free and independent Alberta, right? Crowd went wild, standing ovation, right? For, literally 85 to 90% of the room stood up and gave a standing ovation, not for me, but for Alberta independence, right? And, and from that point forward at that AGM, every time Danielle mentioned the MOU, she got roundly booed, right? Which is not something that normally happens to Danielle. She's very popular, right? So, so that's the issue here, is that the UCP base firmly supports independence, And Danielle, as the leader of the UCP, is doing everything she can in every manipulative, dirty, sneaky, underhanded way to prevent the membership from making that clear, either through a special general meeting or an annual general meetings or whatever it is, right? So,
Yeah.
there's a point where she's going to lose her moral authority to lead the party. And I think that, that point is coming sooner rather than later. I mean, obviously, we're grateful, to her for, the, amending the Citizens Initiative Act to allow this petition to go forward. But again, like she stated publicly just the other day that, that she supports, Alberta remaining in Canada. So she got her little pom-poms and she's a remain in Canada girl, right? She's a little Tommy she's a little Tommy the commie girl. Isn't that nice, right? Leading the UCP. Well, she's shoulder to shoulder and arm with Marxist Carney, Naheed Nenshi, and Tommy Lukasik. I mean, come on. At what point, have you not lost the moral authority to lead the United Conservative Party of Alberta, right?
I mean, you make a good case, but I mean, like, see, this ties into like they're all part of the King's Privy Council, right? And this is kind of like into question number one, like because I mean, they've am I wrong when I say that, have they not sworn and made oaths? Like,
but I mean that's nonsense, right? Because I mean, the other issue is, and that's why very early on, I generally don't refer to the Republic of Alberta. I refer to the Commonwealth of Alberta. The day after independence, the government of Alberta is still the government of Alberta, right? We still have a lieutenant governor and council, et cetera. It's the Crown and right of Alberta that's going to be negotiating the devolution of federal powers from the federal state to what will then become the independent state of Alberta, right? So, we're going to be, at the end of that process, Alberta is still going to be a Commonwealth country. All we're going to be doing is having, all the powers of the federal government under Section 91 of the British North America Act, 100% of those powers be devolved upon the government of Alberta, right?
I see what you mean. Yeah, okay, I got you.
So, that's the process, right? There wouldn't be any move to republicanism or Alberta becoming a republic until such time as people voted on a new constitution.
I see what you mean.
And people would have a say as to whether or not Alberta, continued notionally to retain Charles as the head of state. And I mean, there's lots of Albertans that have, close ties to the monarchy, have an affinity to the monarchy, but there's still no reason that we couldn't have completely ditch the Westminster system, have an elected Senate, an elected legislature, an elected executive, elected attorney general, elected auditor general, and simply promote the lieutenant governor to the governor general, right? As an example, right? But, those are all things to be decided in the future. I know every time I talk about this, lots of people in our movement get really annoyed with me. It's like, we're doing this to get rid of King Charles. But those are all things to be decided in the future. They're not being decided now, right? And then for all people that say, oh, you're a traitor and this is treasonous and blah, 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 it's like, wait a minute, like, was Sir John A. Macdonald a traitor, and was he treasonous because he got together all of the various, governments of Lower Canada and the Maritimes and Quebec, or Upper Canada, Lower Canada, and the Maritimes, at a constitutional conference to form the Confederation of Canada and to negotiate with the with the government of the United Kingdom, to have the Parliament of the United Kingdom pass a bill, because keep in mind, our founding constitutional document is an act of the British Parliament called the British North America Act, right? Exactly. So were Sir John A. Macdonald and the Fathers of Confederation traitors or treasonous to the Crown, or did they violate their oaths to the Crown by negotiating the devolution of power from Great Britain to Canada and making Canada a country? Of course not. Right? So that's what people need to keep in mind here. That's what we're talking about. This isn't some radical anti-constitutional exercise. This is a legal constitutional exercise that is grounded in Canadian constitutional history, right? All of the powers of the Parliament of the United Kingdom were devolved onto, the new country of Canada through the British North America Act. There would have to be, companion legislation in Ottawa. There'd be companion legislation in Alberta. I mean, there is going to, there will be a massive devolution of federal power onto the province of Alberta. There's a legal process set out in the secession reference. Canada is required to negotiate, and then, of course, but the Supreme Court basically left the door open, to what happens if Canada doesn't negotiate in good faith, right? They left the door open saying, hey, we're not going to rule on whether or not, a unilateral declaration of independence followed by international, recognition, would offend Canadian law, because we're not there yet. And nobody is advocating that at this point, right? Could it happen? Perhaps, who knows? But, right now we're engaged in a lawful constitutional process that will hopefully culminate in Alberta becoming a free and independent country through lawful constitutional negotiation with the government of Canada, as set out in the secession reference.
Yeah, no, it's you totally understand what's going on. Like I'm on your wavelength. I understand what you're trying to do. Like, and let's wrap up with this one. This is it's technically was number 2, but we kind of went in reverse order here, which is fine, because I know you've advocated for First Nations rights, for litigated for most of your career, right? Like, which is a good thing, right? Like for them, so that they could win some of these battles in court. And I because of course there's a lot of rhetoric out there against, like it's their land and yada yada yada, and what we're doing is wrong. But I do understand we're under Treaty 6, 7, and 8 in Alberta,
and 4.
Apparently,
and Treaty 4 actually swings into Alberta.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know. Okay,
anyway.
Yeah, like why don't we just kind of wrap up the conversation just about that? Like, what's your take on
first of all, I wish the Chiefs would go to albertaprosperityproject.com, or at least some of their lawyers that are so histrionic and hysterical over all of this, and download The Value of Freedom. Because it makes it clear that this entire project is with complete respect for existing treaty and Aboriginal rights, in the province of Alberta. And as I've said more than once in court, I take the most expansive view of what those rights are of any lawyer in this province, because I understand them better than any lawyer in this province, including the lawyers that are currently representing them. I've forgotten more about treaty and Aboriginal rights law in Alberta than most of these people, most of these young lawyers know, because I was the one that pioneered and argued all of the early cases. Like, I was at the Supreme Court of Canada on Haida and Taku. I won the Mikisew case, at the Supreme Court of Canada, which Nigel Banks, a professor of law at University of Calgary, says is the most important treaty rights decision in Canada since the St. Catherine Millings decision in the 19th century, right? So, I developed all of the law that First Nations are relying on to make the claims that they're making, but unfortunately their lawyers don't understand the law. So they're going into court and claiming that this petition process, as an example, infringes their treaty rights. And of course my challenge to those lawyers, and I was saying it again yesterday, how are treaty rights infringed by people simply communicating with the government, by writing their name on a petition, and by having that petition communicated to the chief electoral officer, and by having the chief electoral officer count and certify the number of signatures, right? Yeah. There's no treaty right that's engaged. People can still hunt, people can still trap, people can still fish, taking the most expansive view of treaty rights possible, which I succeeded in winning at the Supreme Court in Mikisew. That is that the oral promises of the treaty commissioners form part of the treaty, not an aid to interpretation, but form part of the treaty. Let's take the most expansive right spoken of by the treaty commissioners, which is, we had to solemnly assure the First Nation or the Indians, because that's the language they used, that they would not be confined to reserves, and that they would be as free to carry on their mode and way of life throughout the tract surrendered as if they never entered into treaty, right? That's the treaty promise, okay? So, but again, tell me how people writing their name on a petition and having that petition tallied and forwarded to the Attorney General, how that in any way impairs the right of a Treaty 8 First Nations person to carry on their mode and way of life throughout the tract surrendered as if they never entered into treaty. It doesn't. So then all this talk about, well, the chief electoral officer didn't consult with us. Well, the chief electoral officer is an officer of the legislature engaged in a function of simply counting ballots, right?
Yeah.
How does
Like
anything he do engage or infringe a treaty right? You know, like it'd be like saying, I want an injunction stopping a postman from delivering the mail because he might deliver mail that, a letter from a constituent to an MLA saying that this constituent doesn't respect my treaty rights. I mean, it's simply communication with the legislature. It doesn't infringe a right. And even if somebody were to write a letter, to the government saying that they hate land acknowledgements and they hate Indians and whatever it is, that doesn't infringe a treaty right. That's an asinine opinion being expressed, by someone in writing to a government official, which, whether you like what they say or not, is their right to do, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's no rights infringement. So that's kind of where this whole thing kind of goes off the rails, is that I think the chiefs are being misadvised by their legal counsel, as to what their rights are. And keep in mind that this is coming from a guy who is, has been and continues to be the biggest supporter legally of the legal rights of First Nations in Alberta, in courts in Alberta. Always has been, always will be. I'm doing this because I believe that First Nations people will be substantially better off in a free and independent Alberta. The Value of Freedom plan, talks about, negotiating resource revenue sharing with, First Nations of Alberta, in a manner that would triple their present revenue from the government of Canada, all of which would be completely affordable within, once we stop sending $50 billion a year, to Ottawa, and we keep all of that money in Alberta.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be easily affordable. And in fact, that's costed into the Value of Freedom plan, which still posits a $37 to $47 billion a year fiscal capacity surplus, which would enable the tax cuts that we're talking about, right? So, I can't understand why the chiefs, and these communities that have been so sorely mistreated and abused by Ottawa for centuries, or over a century and a half, are so think that there's so much value in that relationship. Like, why do the chiefs in Alberta think it's such a good thing that Alberta taxpayers continue to send $15 billion a year to Quebec rather than keeping that money in Alberta so that we can afford to engage in meaningful resource revenue sharing with Alberta First Nations communities, right? And why do the chiefs of Alberta First Nations don't understand the opportunity that Alberta independence presents to them, because they get to sit down at the table under Section 35.1 of the Constitution Act 1982 and have a meaningful say in what the new relationship with the government of an independent Alberta is going to look like. All of that can be negotiated. Like when the NRTA came into force in 1930, transferring, full ownership of lands and minerals to Alberta, the chiefs didn't have the opportunity, or the First Nations didn't have an opportunity to sit down at the table and say, hey, this is great, but we need to talk about all the ongoing violations of our rights, and we'd like to have these addressed, in the context of this constitutional transfer of power from the federal government to the province under the NRTA. They have that opportunity now. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't believe this was a massive opportunity for First Nations people, but unfortunately, their present legal counsel don't have the wit to understand that.
Yeah, no, and it just seems, it's unfortunate. Right? Like you said.
And then on top of it, I mean, the other thing I always say too is we have far more Indigenous people in Alberta that support Alberta independence than there are chiefs in Alberta. I mean, we have Indigenous canvassers. I mean, we've had thousands of treaty people, coming to sign the petition.
Yeah, they're signing,
and proudly using their treaty cards as their photo ID when they come to sign the petition.
There you go.
Oh, no, for sure, right? And I mean, a lot these rank and file First Nations people, grassroots, Indigenous people, are fed up with the present system. They're fed up with the chiefs and councils. They're fed up with all the corruption and graft and everything else that they see going on around them, and they're fed up with being forced to live in, seeing their family members live in poverty in one of the richest countries in the world. They're fed up with the fact that, they're not going anywhere. Their communities aren't going anywhere But the government of Canada, instead of acknowledging that post-secondary and trades education under the treaties is a treaty right, and I can show you cases where the government has actually gone to court and has acknowledged that education and training to enable so as to enable them to always earn their living is a treaty right. But instead of offering free trades training and getting First Nations people from Fort McMurray, Janvier, whatever into programs at SAIT to teach them how to weld or whatever funded by the Canadian government to get them off of welfare. No, guys like Jason Kenney were making sure that Statistics Canada wouldn't go to the reserves and tally up the unemployment rate, on First Nations reserve land, so that they could justify bringing in cheap welders from India and Pakistan and all these other places, because that's what all of their billionaire patrons want. They don't want to wait Canada to train Indigenous people. They don't want Indigenous welders. They don't want, people that actually are from here, working for them. They want, they want to bring in cheap labor from Pakistan and India, right? And Jason Kenney was a big part of that when he was immigration minister. I know.
I'm glad you brought that up.
I've been there through all of this, and I've been
watching.
Yeah,
you understand it. No, I mean you've got a clear understanding of what's really going on, and you understand how I call it the shadow government works behind the scenes with the NGOs, and that's basically how it works, right? Everything's manipulated. But like with you, it's like you're just a voice of conscience and like here's the plan. Like you're the guy with the plan to me, and I actually I'm totally on board with what you want to do, and of course I'm going to support this right to the end. So I really appreciate the amount of work and effort you guys have put into this, right? So yeah, and I mean I really appreciate the conversation and the time you've given to do the interview as well, and I'll make sure as many people get to hear your case, right, and why we should vote yes October 19th, right? Like of course, the question is, do you agree that the province of Alberta should cease to be a part of Canada to become an independent state? And of course, my answer is 100% yes.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know how anybody in their right mind could vote against that.
Yeah,
and all these people that are out campaigning against it, like I say to them, why do you hate our children so much? Like, why do you want to maintain, the tyrannical, system of affairs that has literally stripped our children of the ability to have a future in Alberta, right? Why, what is it, about our kids that you hate so much, right? That you are, that you're supporting that they continue to be tax slaves of the government of Canada for the rest of their lives, in the name of some red and white flag that, progressively
doesn't mean anything.
Less and less and less to the values that Canada was founded on, right? I mean,
as an example,
right. Like during the convoy, right? The Canadian flag was referred to by the Canadian government as a symbol of right-wing extremism and hate, right? But now they want to wrap themselves in it because they know that there's a lot of senior citizens out there that feel very nostalgic about it. And, that's the only thing they have to offer. Well, don't you want to be able to wrap yourself in the flag and give yourself a nice little flag hug? And then you can chant elbows up along with the rest of us idiots.
Oh, the elbows up.
We can do the little stupid, Diana Fox Carney elbows up dance while we're looking like spastic morons. Come on.
I like that one. Yeah. I mean,
is that all you got? I mean, is that all you got?
That's all they got.
Right? Yeah. And elbows. Let's do the elbows up dance.
I know. I mean, that's gone totally viral. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Mr. Rath. Yeah. Thank you very much for the interview and for your time for discussing all these issues. And, man, we'll keep bringing that flag forward and, the campaign is on, right? I mean, and yes, of course, the results will be in on Monday, right? That's correct, right? Monday's the day.
Yeah, and it's exciting. I actually have to go back to the office and get a bunch of things organized. But we're obviously we're going to have a statutory declaration setting out the number of signatures that have been gathered, and I think I'm gonna see if our people are going to be able to give us a constituency by constituency breakdown of how many signatures we have per constituency, because I think all of these MLAs need to understand that they will not get reelected, right, without the support of the Alberta independence movement. And if they
Yeah.
don't want to support independence, and they, as little, UCP, caucus members, want to continue to support Danielle Smith and her silly, strong Alberta within a united Canada nonsense, and all of her now announcing herself as part of the Remain in Canada campaign. I think they need to
Yeah.
understand that we're going to be looking to get our members out to nomination meetings and to take an active role in deciding who does and doesn't get to run in the next election. Right.
100%, man. And I totally agree with you, man.
And
Again,
for
thank
people
you.
watching this, I want to get if you support Alberta independence,
Yeah.
one of the most important things that you can do this week is to buy a UCP membership. The more of our supporters that buy UCP memberships, the stronger a message it sends to the party that the base, is firmly in favor of independence. And then unless our leader embraces independence, that she lacks the moral authority to continue to lead the party.
Okay. Yeah, good point. Yeah, Mitch reiterated the same information. And yeah, I actually went out and did that. I have my card. Well, they sent me a digital one or whatever it was. But okay, now where can people find you? They can find you on X. There's the
I'm
Alberta Buster.
I'm at Jeffrey R.W. Rath on X, and
Okay.
that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then otherwise, I guess apparently I'm all over the internet now. I don't.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, I
I
mean, man,
never
you're.
intended this to happen. Let's be really clear.
Yeah, you're all over the place.
I
Yes.
never ever wanted to be famous. Trust me.
Well, it's no, but it's that passion and that plan that you have, and you're a lawyer, and yeah, no, you've given really great leadership for all of us that are looking for real change. So again, thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks for your time. So yeah, follow this guy on X. So and let's support his work, and let's try and work together, guys. So it's Tom Dean's sheepdogging. It's the biodigital convergence transhumans report. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks
All
for your
right. Well,
time.
thank you for having me on. It was a fun conversation. I think we covered lots of ground, and
It was good. Yeah,
I'm sure
yeah,
we've said lots of things that'll make people happy and will alternatively make other people's heads explode. So
yeah.
I think we've accomplished our mission today. So thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
that's right. 100%. Yeah. Thanks a lot,
All right.
Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah,
Have a
take
nice day.
care.
Over and out. Okay. Bye. Yeah.